A blessed Triduum to all of you, and a blessed Good Friday, which is today such an extraordinary day. And I thought I would just share a few very brief reflections today. These are reflections that came to me during the Palm Sunday reading of the Gospel and that I jotted down later. This begins the 3 days of the Triduum, and today, Good Friday, is not the second day of the Triduum. So last night was the Mass of the Lord's Supper. We usually call that Holy Thursday, but actually if you're a Jew, it would not have been Thursday, because by the time the supper was celebrated after sunset, it's already Friday, because Friday begins at sunset. So the beautiful unity of the Mass of the Lord's Supper, which is the Passover meal celebration Jesus had with his disciples, where he anticipates his passion and death and resurrection, where he offers his body in anticipation at the Last Supper, is really Friday, a unity with the cross. So the cross and the supper happen on the same day. They both happen together. And Friday, of course, is the 6th day of the week. And in the Genesis account, the 6th day of creation is the day on which man is made in the image of God. God makes us male and female in his image. And so what a remarkable irony it is that on that day that God created us in his image puts God to death. The ultimate expression of what sin is. Sin is a rejection of being the divine image and wanting to set in its place what the Old Testament calls an idol. An idol, which is we want to make God in our image and in our likeness, that it's not thy will be done, but my will be done. That's really what sin is in its heart, and of course the Passion allows sin to play itself out to its most extreme. And in the agony in the garden, which we read on Sunday and Palm Sunday from Mark's Gospel, in the agony in the garden, Jesus really faces this most profound and agonizing tension between the will to not do the will of God and the will to surrender to the will of God, right? The human rebellion against the will of God and the human submission. And once a human being submits to the will of God, the human being, male and female, become the image and likeness of God, which of course is the paradox built into the fact that when you surrender your freedom to God, your freedom is set free to be what it was created to be, where will and nature come into perfect harmony. And at the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus faces this ancient struggle of humanity, which humanity was never able to overcome, from the garden to life outside of Eden for the rest of history. And Jesus faces this as the new Adam and is, of course, triumphant. But the beauty of it is in the agony in the garden, he faces it. He doesn't evade it. He doesn't go above it. He's not beyond it. He has to go straight into the heart of our agony over not wanting to do the divine will. And that scene, which I won't go through in detail line by line, is remarkable because Jesus, when he brings the disciples with him into the Garden of Gethsemane after the Last Supper, when he's already in the meal, already offered himself. This is my body which will be given up for you. This is my blood which will be shed for you. He's already said yes. He's already consented, but yet, even though he's consented now, he has to do it again in a much more profound form, under the form, you might say, of darkness. He's now entered into the darkness of the reality. He's entering into the heart of sin. Like the scapegoat, sin is beginning to accumulate on his back. He's beginning to bear and carry the sins of the world so that he might, as we say in the Mass, take away the sins of the world, take them off into the desert like the scapegoat that's sent out there by the high priest, loaded down with all the sins and rebellion of Israel. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus throws himself down on the ground, Mark says, which is so beautiful. The sign of submission, right? The sign of total surrender. And what does he do? Well, throughout the Gospels, he's been predicting his passion. He said, the Son of Man has come not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for the many. But yet, when he comes to this moment, he asks the Father to let the hour pass him by. If it's possible. Just remarkable. Because he knows that this is why he came. but yet he's willing to allow you might say, temptation. He's tempted in every way we are, but doesn't sin. He experiences the temptation of, even though he knows this is what the Father wants, he experiences in him the rebellion against it, right? Which is extraordinary. And he doesn't just set that aside, or he doesn't just grit his teeth like a stoic and move on, but he prays out of that temptation. I mean, literally gives voice to the temptation to God and asks God to fulfill the temptation, which is just mind-blowing. But yet he seals that praying out of his temptation with the completion of it, which is, but not my will, but your will be done, which is, of course, what he taught us in the Our Father. And, of course, is what he learned from his mother, who no doubt told him again and again the story of the Annunciation of the angel Gabriel, where she says, after her confusion and struggle with what he's asking her, she says, let it be done to me according to your word. So Jesus understands how this language works, but he also understands that to pray out of all of that temptation and fear and give it to God opens up that temptation to grace. You're not going directly at the temptation itself and consenting to it, but rather you're bringing it to God. So when I'm tempted, I find myself tempted to rebel against God, to do the wrong thing, to evade my responsibilities, to run away from conflict and challenge. Instead of just kind of ignoring that in my own spiritual life because it's shameful, rather I come to God with it. And even am so bold as to pray, God, like Augustine says, Lord, make me chaste, but not yet. Pray out of that temptation and give it to him. And then when we open it up to him, he can redeem it. He can heal it. Because God can't redeem what he doesn't assume to himself, doesn't take to himself. So Jesus allows that in the garden. And what's also beautiful is in the Garden of Gethsemane, he prays the only time in all the Gospels that we hear Jesus praying to the Father with the Aramaic word Abba, which is the word for father, which is a very intimate, familial, childlike word. You could translate it daddy, although I don't know if it exactly goes that way, but that's the idea. That's preserved in there is just magnificent, because he can express to God, his Father, the eternal Father, who sent him into the world, he can express to the Father his deepest fears and deepest temptations, because God is his Abba, is his Father, which is just extraordinary in that time of terror. And whenever the word Father is used, it takes with it a sense of family, of course, but also of trust, of total, absolute trust, and that this Father can hear anything you say to him, no matter what you say to him. So Jesus says that, but yet the trust goes not only to being able to say to God whatever we're struggling with or terrified of or tempted to, and giving that to him honestly and openly, but also to submitting to his ultimate will in the end, because we trust that whatever it is that he presides over will be for our supreme good, our final good, our ultimate good. And so Jesus asks, he begs that the cup pass him by. The cup, which is, of course, maybe you could say, is the cup of the Passover meal. Scott Hahn, others have famously argued that there were the four cups, and this is the final cup of the meal that he's going to drink now, the cup of consummation on the cross. I don't know, scripture scholars can debate that out. But also it conjures up, and for me this is even more profound, the image of cup used in Psalm 75, verse 8, where it describes the cup this way. It says, "For in the hand of the Lord there is a cup with foaming wine, well mixed. He will pour a draught from it, and all the wicked of the earth shall drain it down to the dregs." Which really refers to what we might call the cup of wrath, of divine wrath in the face of human sin and injustice. And that the wicked drain that justice, that wrath of God in punishing injustice. But Jesus himself on the cross is willing to drink that cup of wrath for us and for our salvation. So Jesus, knowing that this is the case, surrenders to the Father, asks for that cup to pass, but in the end, in surrendering, he ends up drinking the cup. And the cup does, right? The cup does pass. The cup does pass away, and it passes from us. He drinks it so that we don't have to drink it. right? So indeed, his prayer is fulfilled, but in an extraordinarily surprising way. And God fulfills our prayers in surprising ways that primarily, I might say, are for the benefit of others, right? So when I pray for things for myself, if I'm Christian, if I have the mind of Christ, I realize that my prayer for others, or for myself rather, is always a prayer for others as well, because I love my neighbor as myself. What happens to them happens to me to them. So their good is my good. So whenever I pray for myself, I'm also including all others, and I'm including especially my enemies, because my enemies are me estranged from myself. If we think of love of neighbor as self as that. So those are some of the thoughts I had on the gospel as we enter into these days with the Lord, and what we can learn from the way that he prayed. And so let me end with St. Ignatius of Loyola's famous Suscipe prayer, that magnificent prayer of submission, of letting go, of giving everything to God, the whole of me, and not only the good stuff, but especially the bad stuff, and doing that under the form of prayer, under the form of raw, honest prayer to our God, who is our Abba, who is our dear Father, whom we love and trust, and we can tell anything to, and we know whatever we open up to him, that he will come in there, and he will do his remarkable work of redeeming, of saving, of healing, of transforming, of consecrating everything in us, so that nothing in us is not in service to his whole plan. Even the darkest parts of us come into his providential will. So we take this prayer with us through this day of Good Friday, and we offer our lives to him and everything we have with the same raw, honest, total, absolute faith and trust that Jesus had as he sweat blood in the garden with his sleeping friends around him, alone with his Father, trusting his Father. That beautiful tenderness of a son, of the Son, who teaches us how to be sons and daughters. And so we pray with St. Ignatius, take, Lord, receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, and my entire will. All I have and call my own, you have given all to me. To you, Lord, now I return it. Everything is yours. Do with it what you will. Give me only your love and your grace, and that is enough for me.